We are live.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sandra Kilgore, the chair of the Planning and Economic Development Committee, and I'd like to welcome you all to the January 8th, 2024 remote meeting. All council, committee members, and staff are participating virtually. And to help our audience follow along, I'll state each section of the agenda aloud. And we also are streaming live on our virtual engagement hub, which is accessible through the virtual engagement hub link on the front page of the city website. We also have the option for the public to listen live by phone. And for those of you out there, we'd like to welcome you today. And for today's meeting, we have the option for people to call in and comment live during the meeting. And to call in and comment live, use the same number, 855-925-2801, meeting code 8187. At that time, your phone will be muted and you'll hear the meeting live. And at this point, speakers will need to push *3 to enter into the speaker queue. And at this time, I'd like to do roll call. I'd like to go through and introduce all the committee members and staff who are participating virtually. Councilwoman Sage Turner will not be joining us today. And council and staff, as I call your name, please say a quick hello. Councilwoman Maggie Ullman.
Hey everybody, Happy New Year.
Assistant City Manager Ben Woody.
Good afternoon.
Assistant City Attorney Janice Ashley.
Hello, everyone.
Planning and Urban Design Director, Stephanie Dahl.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Assistant Director of Planning and Urban Design, Chris Collins.
Good afternoon, everyone.
And Interim Transportation Director, Jessica Morris.
Hello.
And Urban Planner 2, Haley Burton. And joining us, okay. And joining us today, we have the chair of the Public Arts and Cultural Commission, which is Johanna Haggerty.
Hi there. Thanks for having me.
And Barry Biaklak. I knew I'd mess up your name, Barry.
Yeah.
Also here as petitioner for the agenda item 3.
Hello, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks, Barry. Okay. The first thing on the agenda today, we'd like to I'll get the approval of the minutes. Can I get an approval?
Make a motion to approve the minutes from our last meeting.
Thank you. And Sandra, I'll second. And at this time, to roll call, Councilwoman Ullman.
Aye.
And myself, aye. The motion passes. The second thing on the agenda today is the Public Arts and Cultural Commission annual update. Joanna Haggerty, chair of the PACC, will actually be doing that update for us. Thank you. And this is for information sharing only today. No action.
Great. Thank you so much, Sandra. I'm really excited to be here. It's my first time doing this, so forgive me. Carly, I know, is standing by if any hard questions come up that we need support answering. Feel free to advance to the next slide, please. So we thought it would be important to kind of have a conversation about what public art means to us on the Public Art Board. And we think it's really important to have a conversation that is larger than just aesthetics. We believe that public art is shared spaces and so many other things than just a physical piece of art. And we think that's a really important place to lay the foundations here. Feel free to advance to the next slide. We are a 9-member commission. We meet virtually every other month right now, and we primarily serve as an advisory capacity to the city council, city manager, and planning and urban design director on matters relating to public art within the city. Our main purposes are facilitating public art and events in public buildings and spaces, helping find ways to promote the arts in Asheville, and strengthening partnerships in the creative community. We have the power to appoint task force, perform necessary duties for implementing decisions, and helping ensure those task forces are following all of the rules. You may advance the next slide, please. This, I thought, was a really valuable piece to kind of present to you all. It came from the Mayor's State of Arts presentation in October of this year to kind of show the different parts. As someone who's been on the board for several years, this slide really just hit for me because even for me, it took me years to kind of understand all the components, and there are many. So obviously there's the Public Art and Culture Commission, and then there's the art collection itself. And that's a really important piece of what we do. Then there's the master plan that's really hopefully helping drive us forward. As you can see, it was written in 2000, readopted in 2008. So it's definitely a little old and stale and needs some massaging and some love to bring it to the forefront. We also have the Percent for Art policy, which is a really amazing program. I'm watching shift and change to really serve artists, which is really exciting. We have obviously all the beautiful administrative work that has to get done, and then sort of these current special projects. So those can be more one-off things as they come. So just thought this was a really great, valuable way to break down all that we do because it is complex. All right, you may advance to the next slide, please. So some of our biggest accomplishments from this last year was we did have several resignation of members. And what we decided to do is to really take that as an opportunity to see, why are these members leaving? Who do we need to really come on? How do we make this board really activated? And we were able to amend the ordinance. That was really exciting. And so we're really trying to use some of those ordinance shifts and having some of the permanent seats and some of the new ways we want to organize ourselves as an ability to move forward in 2024 and really support the efforts a lot more. So it's a bit of a rocky year in some ways, but I think we're really coming out that and seeing these as strengths and moving forward. So we're pretty excited about that. You may advance to the next slide. Okay, so one of the other major things that happened in 2023 was that vision plan for Pack Square Plaza, and the work that, the PAC did and what Carly and Steph were able to do was just massive in being able to really bring some of that stuff to the table. Us as members would show up at the public engagement events and help support with that communication. We did also have a special meeting early on in that process to help make sure that we thought that process was going to be really valuable. So it's really exciting to be a part of that and see the results that have come out of that now. You may advance to the next slide, please. And then we also were able to do 3 more Art in the Heart installations, which sort of wrapped that whole program. The next slide will break that down a little more, but these were the 3 specific installations we were able to do this year, ranging from dance to 3D projections. It's really been amazing to see the variety of art. And I don't know if you guys have been able to participate in some of them. The last one that we've had up has been particularly emotionally pointed, as the artist herself is no longer here on this earth anymore. And so just a lot of beautiful things being able to carry forward from art, and it's really wonderful. So if you want to advance the next slide, this will kind of break down a more robust breakdown of what Art in the Heart was able to do throughout the 2 years of being up and running. That middle section really breaks down the different types of art that existed: performance, installation, exhibit. It's really amazing to realize that that program was able to bring out over 500 participants to really involve themselves in art and creativity in that understanding as, what are we doing in Pack Square? How do we move forward and to heal from some of that? So it was really beautiful to watch from the Pack side of things. And I hope that you guys really felt that impact too. Okay, you may advance. Okay, so some of our upcoming goals for this year are to really take these new PAC ordinances, integrate them into what we're doing. We have our retreat coming up in the next couple weeks, so we're really excited to get our new members on and move that forward. We would love to take a stab at getting the Public Art Master Plan updated. Again, we now have some of these new frameworks. We would really love the ability to tie that into the plan that allows for us to move that forward. We always are advocating for a full-time public art staff person. We know the importance of that. We obviously know that's a very challenging thing to get to, but we see that as a really important part of the process for keeping art as the center of what we're doing here in Asheville and how it can be an economic driver as well. Definitely looking for those program developments and strategic partnerships, maintenance of the inventory that we currently have, the public art projects that we have going on in the River Arts District, and then to keep using that 1% of public art funds and finding the right place for those. Okay, you can advance to the next slide. All right, so I would love to open it up. If anyone has any thoughts or questions, we can always go back to any slide. I just wanted to make sure that you had all the information we had to provide.
Thank you very much, Johanna. It's a lot going on. A lot going on. I think you've all been very busy, and basically I can understand where you are now because you have so much on your plate. You really need to have some type of organizational plan to make sure that everybody follows through. So thank you very much for the update. Don't have any questions. We have Councilwoman Ullman who just.
Yeah, I just want to echo the gratitude and excitement. A question, which you might not know the number offhand, but maybe someone from staff would. What's the ball? Remind me what the 1% dollar figure comes to because it's an interesting policy. We don't have a lot like that, but I think it's a cool policy that sets us apart. That we say this is always going to be a part of who we are, but I'm blanking on the relative dollar amount of that.
Yeah, I definitely am hoping one of the staff members can come. I know it's existing in one of our documents. I could probably pull it up, but if either one of you have it off the top of your head, I think it's really valuable info too. We should have totally put that in there, shouldn't we?
Update. I'm not trying to give you a gotcha quiz. It was just
no.
Okay.
So yeah, the other thing I know that there's a lot of conversation that we have been and will be having about the state of our theater, of our Thomas Wolfe Amphitheater. And so hopefully we can be connecting and with this committee over time that, at some extent that conversation is really about capital and facilities. But to what end, the what end is art. So just might be a place to collaborate in the future.
Okay. And I think Stephanie, you had a question or answer?
I was just going to answer the amount of money question and say, well, first I'll say yes, Maggie, for sure. As Joanna and others have put out there, that many of the same companies that want to use the Thomas Wolfe Auditorium are the same organizations and institutions that we work with as public art partners many times or for outdoor special events. The amount of money per year varies depending on what the amount of capital projects are, and that ranges anywhere from about $90,000 to $190,000 a year. It's no small chunk of change, and 2 years ago we made a big change by actually we publish it as part of the budget document every year so that it's visible.
Thanks for that refresher.
Okay, if no one else any other questions, thank you very much, Joanna. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate you all.
Thank you. The number 3 on our agenda today would be the UDO text amendment, Black Lots and Cottage Clusters. The resource will be Chris Collins, Assistant Director of Planning and Urban Design. And so we can go from there. And this will be information sharing and also for procedural feedback.
Right, thank you. Good afternoon. As stated, I'm Chris Collins with the Planning and Urban Design Department, and I'm here to talk to you about the flag lot and cottage development zoning text amendments that are in front of City Council via a resident petition. The full council did hear these amendments in October, and the item was continued to the upcoming meeting on January 23rd. So we're here today to give you some information and get some general feedback in advance of that. Next slide, please. We'll look at some key takeaways today. In fact, we'll be looking at that these public-led text amendments would change UDO requirements for flag lots and cottage developments. The key also is that this text amendment would increase the amount of land available in the city for the creation of single-unit homes or single-family homes. And since October, staff has had the ability to analyze the request against the recently published Missing Middle Housing Study and have conducted further community engagement on the proposal. The original petition for flag lots has been amended by the applicant with slightly larger allowances than we're seeing before and a few other elements, and I'll present that to you as well. And while for a few reasons, the overall echo you'll hear from staff is that we really still feel this would be best set as part of the missing middle housing implementation. If City Council does desire to move forward with something, we are proposing alternate UDO amendments that reflect the findings of the missing middle housing study. Next slide, please.
May I ask Christian, I have a question.
Sure.
Yes. Could you maybe elaborate a little bit more on the text amendment that increases the amount of land available in the city? Basically, what exactly are we looking at here?
Sure. So basically what this does is lowers the barriers for the creation of a flag lot by changing some supplemental requirements, and first and foremost, really by reducing the required width at street frontage. So it would make more lots eligible for the creation of flag lots.
Okay. So it's okay. Got it. Understand.
And then on the cottages, the resident proposal would reduce the barrier for that from a minimum of 5 units down to 2 units. So again, making more land eligible for these structures.
Super. Thank you.
Okay. Next slide. So I'll go through these pretty fast because y'all have seen most of these before, but just for bring it back up to speed, a flag lot is a lot with the bulk of its buildable area towards the rear and a small flagpole portion providing the street frontage. Next slide. Cottages are detached structure developments that are oriented towards a community green or community open space feature and do represent a missing middle housing typology. They are currently something that is allowed within RS districts, but they do permit more than 1 unit on a lot. So that's what makes them special in those RS districts. Next slide, please. The current zoning regulations, again, you've seen these, but a real quick recap, requires the flag lot pole and the flag lot width of the street to be at least 20 feet. And that flag pole portion of the lot not be counted when calculating minimum lot area and other things for compliance with the UDO. There's a provision on there for a gravity sewer service line and a limitation of 1 flag lot per subdivision of less than 8 lots and not more than 2 flag lots or 10% of the lots in a larger subdivision of more than 8 lots. Next slide, please. The amended public petition now calls for the reduction of both the width of the street and width of the flagpole portion of the lot from 20 feet to 10 feet. Previously, that was 5 feet, what they were being requested to look at. Does call for the inclusion of that flagpole portion of the area of the lot for UDO compliance, the elimination of that gravity sewer service line provision, a limitation of on the quantity of flag lots per subdivision to 1 flag lot per zoning standard width lot, and a provision to reduce the front yard setback as applied. Next slide, please. As we said, while we do feel this is best suited to go forward with the rest of the missing middle housing study implementation, we are proposing an alternate if council does choose to move forward. And at this point, the staff recommended alternate regulations would reduce that flagpole width and street frontage width to 12 feet from 20. It would revise the limitation on the number of flag lots to 1 flag lot per parent parcel in subdivisions less than 5 lots and not more than 2 lots or 10% in larger subdivisions of more than 5 lots. Does offer a limit on the gross floor area of the primary structure of the flag lot, a limit to the footprint of 1,000 square feet and to the total area of a home of 1,400 square feet. It does set the setback line for the lot line of the flag lot parallel to the street. What we would apply is the front setback to be equal to the side setback of the corresponding zoning district. So in this instance, you see a 6-foot setback on that illustration. That would now be the front setback. And reduces the side yard setback for the line of the parent or residual parcel that adjoins the flagpole portion of the flag lot to 3 feet. Next slide, please. Originally, this was sent to you, and we've updated this slide based on new findings and amended proposals. Planning and Zoning Commission sent this to the Technical Review Committee for review on technical issues with the request. And these are the technical concerns that still persist right now. There is concern that a reduced pole from 20 feet And street frontage cannot properly accommodate a driveway, which in the city of minimum driveway width is 9 feet, or sufficient utility installations alongside that driveway. There also may be issues present with the area needed for grading to install a driveway on that pole. Currently, our technical review committee did advise us that flag lots already present challenges with Buncombe County's unique emergency addressing system. And that is due to the number of addresses that can be assigned per lot frontage, which can increase the number of flag lots, increases that challenge, and raises some concerns about appropriate addressing and making sure we have proper emergency response times. And still, we do have the concern that a reduction of any lot quantity limitations may allow subdivisions to circumvent major subdivision regulations, which would forego utility allocations and required infrastructure placement. Next slide, please. Since we saw council in October, staff has been working through a series of engagement events centered around these proposals or flag lot proposals and cottages. You see on the slide there, we have been with the Neighborhood Advisory Committee, held several open virtual presentations, spoke with the Builders Association of the Blue Ridge Mountains, which is the renamed Asheville Home Builders Association. Coalition of Asheville Neighborhoods held a meeting at Shiloh where we did present and try to do some engagement on this as well. Legacy Neighborhoods Coalition, the Land of Sky Association of Realtors. When looking at this through an equity lens, it's important to know that as presented right now, these changes would affect all parcels citywide. This is not focused to any certain area or does not currently contain any anti-displacement strategies or things thrown in there. The missing middle housing study displacement analysis that was published with the study results does offer up some possible anti-displacement strategies that are currently being analyzed as a part of the missing middle housing implementation plan, and does let us know that caution should be exercised when making broad changes and would encourage consideration of concurrent application of anti-displacement strategies. Next slide, please. When we spoke with neighborhoods and groups, like we just mentioned in the last slide, there's a general understanding out there. We are in a housing crisis and changes are needed to make housing more attainable and affordable. We did hear prevalent concerns about ensuring emergency access to new homes is preserved. There was concern about backyard homes being incompatible with desired neighborhood development patterns in some of the areas we went. Definitely concern was placed about displacement and gentrification coming along with more development within areas. We heard tree canopy reduction as a concern and open space reduction. Next slide, please. All right, so how does this all pair up with the missing middle housing study that's been published since we last saw council on this? There are specific recommendations within the missing middle housing study report pertinent to both flag lot typologies and cottage developments. And I'm going to take you through those real quick. The study report does recommend a flagpole width at a minimum of 12 feet for the flag lots. And for cottage developments, it recommends a minimum of 3 units for a cottage development. In addition, for neighborhood compatibility, which the study does get into in order to lessen the impact of the needed additional housing units, it does recommend orientation to the primary street for cottage developments as much as possible. Next slide, please. All right, so in summary of everything I just showed you, because I know a lot of those slides had a lot of arrows and call outs and all that, the current regulations call for a 20-foot flagpole and width at street. Don't allow the use of the pole portion to calculate the minimum area for UDO compliance. And they limit the quantity of flag lots per subdivision to 1 per subdivision less than 8 lots, or 2 or 10% per subdivision greater than 8 lots. There's an implied but not spelled out in the UDO front setback line of the full front setback of the zoning district on the line parallel to the street. Does not offer any reduced setback options for anything on the parent or residual parcel, nor does it contain any structure size limitations for what is built on those flag lots. The amended resident proposed UDO amendment calls for a reduction of the flagpole and street frontage minimum width to 10 feet. Does allow the use of the pole portion to calculate minimum area, sets a flag lot quantity limitation per subdivision of 1 per minimum zoning lot width in a subdivision, applies a side setback to what would now be considered the front line of the flag lot, does call for the 3-foot reduced side setback for the property line of the residual or parent parcel adjoining the pole portion, and within the RS districts, structure size limitations of a 1,000 square foot footprint or 1,400 square foot gross floor area. And what I'll do is just highlight the differences between what staff is proposing as an alternate if council chooses to move forward with changes to these sections at this time. It'd be a difference of 2 feet in the flagpole and street frontage and minimum width to allow for a driveway and proper utility installation. And a little bit of a difference in the lot quantity limitation per subdivision, where staff would say that quantity limitation should still be set per size of the subdivision at 1 per less than 5 lots or 2 or 10% for subdivisions greater than 5 lots. The rest of the elements you'll see, we are aligned with the resident proposal. Okay, next slide, please. For the cottage development proposed changes, right now we're currently looking at a minimum, the ordinance currently calls for a minimum of 5 cottages to be eligible to do these within these RS districts. Again, to put multiple units on one parcel with a 200-foot required separation between developments, and does require orientation of units towards the primary street. The resident proposal would reduce that to 2 cottage units, eliminate the separation requirement, and not contain a requirement to orient units towards the primary street. As we stated earlier, based on the findings that we've received in the missing middle housing study, if council chooses to move forward with changes to the section at this time, staff feels it would be more appropriate to set that minimum number of cottage units at 3, as reflected in the missing middle housing study. Again, no issues with removing the separation between developments, but would still incorporate a requirement to orient units fronting an existing street towards that street in order to promote neighborhood compatibility. Next slide, please. So there are your key takeaways again, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Well, I always have questions. The table is super helpful just to distill. Could you break it down a little bit more? The row in the flag lots talking about lot quantity limitation per subdivision. I don't really, what it's saying is fundamentally those requirements are saying like, here's the number of flag lots allowable in that amount of a subdivision. So our current says you could only do 1 flag lot per subdivision if there's more than 8. Like I don't even know how to read those. I'm a very smart lady. So could you just like help me understand some of the planner speak there?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's kind of
to jump to implication. It's just hard to get through the technical stuff.
Yeah, and that it's a wordy ordinance provision, and that was a kind of a shorthand distillation. But
it's
basically,
so hard.
Yeah. Basically, if someone's coming in with a subdivision of less than 8 lots, so anything less than 8 lots, then there's currently a limitation that only one of those can be a flag lot. Now, if we go over 8 lots, then there's an allowance for 2 or 10%. So if we're at 30 lots, then 3 of them, it can be there.
So in the citizen proposal, translate that one to me, because basically what you just explained does make sense to me. And so staff's recommendation is to follow that same logic of design, but when it's with 5 units or less, it can be more. But what is the citizen proposal line item mean there?
So my understanding of this, and I know we have the resident petitioner with us today, so he might be able to further expand on this. But my understanding is, let's say we are in the RS8 district and the minimum lot width in that district is 40 feet. My understanding is this provision is saying that for every 40 feet of lot width, you can only have one flag lot. And for the next 40 feet, you could have another flag lot and so on. So if you're in a district where the minimum width is 60, every 60 feet, you could have another flag lot.
Got it. And I saw Barry nodding, so thank you for doing some translation with me. And all of that bears out with the theme we're talking about here, which is we only have so much space. We have so many people who want new doors. Are there ways that we can responsibly create space for new homes and new families? And so our current zoning has a lot of stuff that puts barriers into the way of addressing our housing shortage. And so in a subdivision, these are just variations of how far we could take it. That's super helpful. The other one that was kind of in the technical realm, and like happy to talk about themes and actual goals and strategy, but in the cottage development, the orientation of units towards the primary street, I don't understand like the strategic why behind this.
That's exactly, I'm concerned too. Thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah, so it's like, if I'm right now, if primary street is here and I'm a cottage developer, okay, showing you with my hands is not going to work, but basically we're saying like there's always, in the current zoning, any building needs to be oriented to the main street, and staff is in the citizen proposal, that orientation could be towards like the internal neighborhood as opposed to the main street. And staff, I'm trying to distill it, just, and I'm not doing a good job. Could you help me understand?
Yeah, absolutely. And Katie, if we could go back a few slides to number 5. It might help kind of, there it was back there.
Yeah.
So this is the image of a cottage development, right? So presuming it's not in this image, but presuming next to the sidewalk there is the primary street.
Got it.
So the goal there would be for those units that are fronting that existing street to address the public realm in some way. The easy way to say that is the primary orientation of the structure. There may be more creative ways to get there. But once you get back into that cottage development, there's presumably no street running down the middle.
Got it.
They're fronting that common green or open space. So they do create their own kind of community area at that point.
So are you saying, Chris, that when you look at these buildings here, and this is the street, I'm just saying where the sidewalk is, these two buildings are not oriented toward the street. They actually, so you're saying just basically those will have to be flipped toward the street, but the others could be, is that?
Yes, that's what we're saying. And I hear the question is kind of also, why is that important, right? And I think that there are a few things. The missing middle housing study, first off, kind of recommends strategies to make additional housing typology fit better with neighborhoods, right? And a lot of that has to do with orientation on the street and addressing the street architecturally. So maybe if a new housing type goes up, that it feels more like part of the neighborhood, right, where it's going, and less like an isolated new development. And then there's also, general planning perspectives of things like eyes on the street and safety and creation of that outdoor space, right? Creation of that living, that public space, the placemaking of it to a degree, which enhances the neighborhood livability. And really just a support for a cohesive feeling of one neighborhood. And we did hear in the engagement, there was some concern about, would the addition of all these new units fit what folks saw as their pattern of development in their neighborhoods? So that's another kind of supporting factor of that. It comes up in the missing middle study, and also we heard a little bit of that during our engagement as well.
A question I have to Chris is, if you go back to the slide where it talks about the square footage of the units, I think it basically had it. We do not have any requirements, and then it went from 1,014, which is what Barry's asking for and what you all recommended. So could you more or less elaborate on that? That you're saying that you cannot build smaller?
No, that's a maximum.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, that is let me see, right, structure size limitations. I could have made that clear. Definitely, that's a maximum structure size on the flag lot.
Okay, got it. Okay. So,
Which has value because then it's also, the smaller the facility, it creates kind of naturally affordable housing in that sense. Or maybe affordable is not the most precise word there, but it just means that there'll be a scale that fits in the neighborhood and you're not going to put bigger.
Yes, that's a theme throughout the missing middle housing study too, is kind of unit size creates more attainability. So
Thank you. I guess the thing that comes for me outside of the specifics, which I appreciate the space to slow down and just get really precise and make sure I really deeply understand everything, is I think when we talked about this before, the concern I heard from many of my peers and I share is how are we going to make any changes to address housing supply while also protecting against displacement? And I feel like having really combed through the missing middle study and PED, had a very lengthy conversation about this last month, it still seems like we have a lot to sort through. Like we don't have that insight just yet. And I would say that like in the missing middle study, lots and cottage courts are like one of the featured strategies that we should consider. So I remain excited about this. I think that I think this proposal has a lot of thoughtful ways to address our housing shortage while also kind of staying in the context of our neighborhoods. But I don't know that we know what our displacement strategies are yet. And I think that we'll be going through a process shortly to really look at how any zoning changes and displacement marry, or anti-displacement strategies marry. And so just curious if we know any more into that. We might not. I know staff is doing a lot of hard work to sort and figure some of that out. But kind of curious from staff if we have any more window into that yet.
oh, Barry has raised his hand. Do you want to respond to that, Barry? We can't hear you. We can't hear.
Sorry. Yeah, I just want to, I have actually a whole presentation queued that addresses some of that. I was wondering if you want to maybe go through that and then we can hit the questions, because some of that displacement discussion I'm addressing by how other cities have already who've already adopted these policies, what they've found. So we've already done some deep dive, some studies, and we've shared some things from Durham and from Raleigh as to how they've felt and how displacement was affected. So I have a whole presentation queued up that might be good to roll through. That way we're not duplicating some of the questions.
Very good. And also, Stephanie, do you have a question before we move on with Barry's presentation?
No, Chair, I think that would be great to go through his presentation and then ask staff and or Barry other questions once he's finished.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everybody. So, so I always like to start quickly with the why. This comes from, I've built about 200 houses in the city of Asheville. I've chaired the city's affordable housing committee for the bulk of the past 6 or 7 years. And one thing, that Chris said to start with is that this proposal will reduce barriers to housing. And I think it's important to note that means we have zoning that allows certain things, but then we have kind of these technical standards that actually act as barriers to create new housing. And what I'm really sharing is from my experience of building 200 houses and doing some of these tricks and doing infill and being one of the largest missing middle developers in the city. What are these barriers and how do we target to change them in the most minor way? And I tried to, come up with small technical tweaks rather than the broad big changes, because we know those packages take a really long time to pass through. So when I look at these are two essential, UDO amendments. One's on the flag lots, one's on cottages. and that these are proven tactics from other cities in North Carolina and beyond that are already in place and are working to create more attainable housing, and we'll discuss that in a little bit. And that for overall, Asheville City staff agrees with that this proposal would lead to the creation of more housing units. And I think that's a really important key, is because we're in such a crisis that we need to create more housing units. And we're in agreement that this change will create more housing units. The other thing I find so much is that there's people want to help. From small builders to individual lot owners, everybody, there's so many people who want to help with the housing crisis, but we don't have the easy tools to do so. So part of the purpose of this amendment is to create easier tools for individuals to help create housing that isn't just in the hands of the large developers and the investors. Next slide, please. So we know the other reasons this really comes from is we talk about some of our why flag lots and small subdivisions are the easiest is these are some actual statistics. Over the past 2 years, we've only had 4 major subdivisions applied for. A major subdivision is anything that creates new road frontage or anything over a certain amount of units. So we've only had 4, and I did update my statistics just to make sure I was accurate, and there's 5 now. So there's been 5 over the past 2 years that have been applied for, and only 1 have been approved. So that says a lot that as much as we have this missing middle study to look on, which is an overall zoning study, we have some fundamental issues and problems with our vetting process for major subdivisions and level 2 permits that we really need to address in parallel. Because here we've got 5, over the past 2 years, five major subdivisions have been applied for, and only 1 has been approved in 2 years. That means people stop coming here and doing projects because it's so difficult. Level 2 zoning permits. Level 2 is needed whenever you're creating more than 19 housing units. So that means other than a conditional zoning, we've only had 21 applications that are level 2, and the majority of them are for hotels and commercials. There's very few actually residential projects that have even come across that are over 19 units. And again, if you look at those statistics over the past 2 years, we've had 21 applied for and only 5 approved. So it's the reason why developers and small projects are not coming through our city is because we have some flawed process. So what this, the purpose of the UDO amendment was to come up with something that goes through the minor subdivision that happens a lot faster, and there's a lot more of those because we really need to overhaul the major subdivision and the level 2 processes to make it more streamlined. And these statistics, I think, really dictate towards that. And I look at it, the purpose and intent of zoning and is, I look at the purpose and intent of zoning district is to create housing in neighborhoods of appropriate density based on our infrastructure and our current neighborhood patterns. But then what we have is these HOA-like micromanagement technical standards that basically don't allow us to build out to the density standards that our zoning allows. And that's where this zoning, these UDO changes come from. There's no increase of density. All this is saying if this is a double-sized lot, these are the tools of how we can access it to be able to put 2 houses on it. So there's no increase of density from this. This is just removing some of the self-made technical barriers to make it easier. Next slide, please. So what this is, we did a deep dive into over the past 2 years. I think our statistics. So we've looked at what was created, the amount of minor subdivision applications. So let's see, we've had over the past 2 years, there's 202 minor subdivision applications. 122 of them were approved. And of the 122, 26 of those were flag lots. So 21% of approved minor subdivisions are flag lots. And the study we did from the MLS and sales records shows that flag lots tend to sell for less because they're just naturally smaller and less desirable lots. So lower cost lots, smaller lots means lower cost housing. Next slide, please. So where the change really comes from is that our 20-foot flag standard does not line up with our current zoning standards. There's so many old lots that were platted in our city that are 50 feet wide. We have current zoning standards in many that are 40 feet wide. That means, and we have a 20-foot flag lot minimum, and those two don't add up. So what we need to do, the purpose is to align the 10 feet so it aligns up with the existing 50-foot lots. So a 50-foot lot can be divided to create a 40-foot primary lot and then a 10-foot flag. Again, this is only based on, on the red there, Asheville's filled with thousands of double-sized lots that the lot square footage is large enough to support 2 separate lots per zoning, but the current standards don't allow it. So technical tweaks to flag lot standards, which are already in place in other municipalities, will accomplish this and create thousands of new lots without increasing allowed density. It's the most gentle incremental density that we can create. Next slide, please. This is just kind of overall broad scope looking at the tools we have. We have ADUs, we have flag lot single family homes, and cottage developments. And our goal that we're trying to create is smaller, more attainably priced homes. So that's really the goal that we're trying to come up with here is how do we create smaller homes that'll sell for less money or rent for less so we can create more units. Next slide, please. So what I really wanted to share, this is what's, we studied what's happening in Durham. So Durham in 2019 passed what's called their Expanding Housing Choices UDO text amendment. And they just did a recent report to their city council in December. And one of the things that they're finding, and I kind of highlighted those in red, is that the small lots and reduced flagpole options are the most utilized of all the provisions in their UDO changes. And the other real important thing is that next line where it talks about, it says that the rate of demolition permits in the urban tier dropped after 2019. So where there was a lot of, the same way we have concern, there was a lot of concern in Durham that creating more small lots would create more displacement or more change in neighborhoods. But what they found is the rate of demolition permits decreased in their urban tier after this happened. And the other real important thing, the other thing in red, is that these small lots created less expensive housing. That the median price of a small house in the urban tier was $348,000, and their average house price is $605,000. So the small lots and the flag lots changes ended up actually creating more affordable houses in Durham. And I think this is a really important thing to look at because we're kind of behind the curve in some of these changes. So by looking at Durham and Raleigh that have done these changes and are going through their second round now of UDO changes, and they found that the most successful tools are the small lots and the reduced flags. I think it's imperative to make our changes and give us our time to study so we can see their effects. But Durham, in Durham's changes, their UDO texts found the biggest use was small lots and reduced flagpoles, and there wasn't really an increase. There wasn't a significant increase in the creation of duplexes or larger plexes. Next slide, please. In Raleigh, so Raleigh also changed their flag lots down to 10 feet wide. And I think it was really important what I circled there, because this is what I've been trying to drive home, is that for those wishing to build a second home, a flag lot can be the primary way to access the financing, which is otherwise not available for ADU construction. In our city, ADUs are primarily built by wealthy people that have equity in their properties. And this changes will give tools for accessing finances and separate deeds of trust on them. The other thing that I think was real important is that flag lots in Raleigh ended up creating and selling and providing income to sellers at risk of displacement. So rather than causing displacement, it created a tool for those who are at risk for how they can remain in their houses by dividing off a piece of their land and selling it off. I think that these are two really important things to show that these are cities that are already adopted some of these changes years ago and are now looking at how they've been working. Next slide, please. So it's kind of technical in the weeds, and I'll do the gloss stuff and you can review this on your own. But basically what I'm trying to show, especially for flag lots, is that in Asheville, our current minimum access width is 20 feet. In Durham, Durham has a 12-foot reduced flagpole option, but their minimum lot widths are also 35 feet, not 40 feet. And that they have a small lot option that allows access easements that are between 9 and 12 feet. So they have options that that have 10 feet and less. In Raleigh, their flag lot standards have a 10-foot standard pole already. And in Charlottesville, which just passed their provisions, they also have 10-foot flagpoles. So it's important to note that this is already in place in other places. We're not like doing something that's not done already. Next slide, please.
And Ben, just in case you didn't, I know that you're presenting, but we just, staff put up a flag of we're at 10 minutes.
Okay, all right. Yeah, so the rest I'll leave you can go with, but basically there's a comparison of the cottage port standards. I did an example of kind of why the 10-foot is necessary from not the 12-foot, because it just doesn't work. It's just the math doesn't work on a 50-foot wide lot. And then we use some examples for cottages to show like how in an RS8, we already have ways you can put a house. There's already ways you can put two houses on a lot with a house and an ADU. You're allowed to do a townhouse, but you're allowed to do a 5-lot cottage tort, but the standards make it more complicated for how to do like the two houses. So the cottage mechanism was the easiest way to accomplish that. So I have some of that deeper dive stuff that's in there, but I know we're out of time.
Thank you, Ben. First, I'd like to say thank you very much, Barry, for that report. And I think that I had spoken with Stephanie about one of the concerns that you had too, Barry, that the lots here in this particular area, when they were divided, for some reason, like you said, 50 width is pretty much the norm, especially in the urban areas, and sometimes even smaller, 46, 48. I've seen some of those. So that in itself is true. And that was one thing I was asking. I know, Barry, you said that there was a large percentage. Do you have any idea of the percentage of those lots? Because it is pretty much, or how they did them, or because I was asking Stephanie, evidently, I don't know if they did that when they were doing urban renewal and start selling dollar lots. Did they just make them all 50 and 48? Was that a way to, and Barry said they're 48 and 50 across the front, and then they go back sometimes 150, 200 deep, which means that unless you can use those lots, it's just extra land sitting back there. And you see a lot of that in the urban area where I work, in Asheville. I don't know about different areas, but I know here in Asheville, it's a lot of, most of them, in fact, I would say, most of the lots, I think, are pretty much all that. Stephanie, I think you have a
Right, just because you brought up my name, I figure I would jump in a little bit here. Yes, this is something we talked about last week, and we framed it as maybe it's not the size of the pole being 10 or 12 feet that's the issue. Maybe it's actually the size of the lot that is required that is the issue. So we just want to remind you that staff is offering an alternate amendment that says that 12 feet for a pole is what we think is really required for us in this community to be able to provide the adequate utility infrastructure and emergency services, and also do that when required, which is not in all of our areas, but the type of grading for stormwater that in our topographic region, this mountainous region, is really important. So that's the first thing. And then the second thing is that we did start analyzing different areas of our community to determine what the average, the median and the mean lot width is. For instance, we were looking at Shiloh, especially because they are one of our legacy neighborhoods. We're not complete with that information. Chris does have some of it here today, but it just generally showing that we have a variety of widths, and the majority of our lot widths are not 50 feet. And we'll be prepared when we go to council to present that information to you so that you can consider that. That'll be in your staff report before you even see us that night.
And I guess when I was asking that question, like you said, a lot of them not, but I see that, especially the legacy neighborhoods, you see a lot of those small lots. So when you basically come back and tell us how many lots are, falling in a certain category, is it any kind of way you can tell us whether those are the legacy neighborhoods where a lot of minorities are impacted? Because I do know, like East End, South Side, Shiloh, you will see a lot of those lots like that. And I mean, they're everywhere. So I'm just trying to, and so when you compare this, will you be comparing these neighborhoods with the other neighborhoods that have the larger width? Because see, I just want to sort of see the percentage in the legacy neighborhoods that have 50 or less size road frontage. Does that make sense? Barry, what I'm saying, does that make sense?
Yeah. I did one of the slides, which we didn't get to, which if you look through the package shows a street it shows State Street, and State Street is primarily 50-foot lots. And I showed the plat from 1920 something versus the plat to current, and it really hasn't changed much. So the majority of lots were platted as like 50 by 150. So it's a pretty standard plat, and it's very, very, very common as one is built.
Very prevalent, yeah.
Very prevalent. Yeah, and the thing I think we'll find in Shiloh, because we actually did really deep dive studies, street studies for different neighborhoods. The one thing about like a neighborhood like Shiloh is where this change will affect Shiloh less is not from the lot frontage, but Shiloh actually has fewer lots that are already double size. Like, so remember, this flag lot change only works if the lot already is minimum in most zonings 8,000 square feet, and Shiloh actually tends to have fewer of those. So we actually did really deep dive street studies to show the effect.
And just to kind of wrap up, staff is going to do some additional analysis. I think, this is not good to even just be throwing this data out here, but for our preliminary look, it looked like less than 20% of the lots were that were 50% or less. So we want to make sure that we can double check that data. Again, we're talking about frontage, not depth.
Yeah,
we're not, so that there's a lot of analysis to look at that. And then, we'll just say that we're really interested, as a reminder, in opening up land for the production of additional housing. And what this does is open up land for the production of additional single unit or single family housing. And it's not focusing on what we've been directed to focus on at this time, which is that middle housing. To reiterate, our concerns are that we already have a flag lot ordinance. We know that it could be better. We've done a lot of comparison to Raleigh and Durham, and they also, once you allow a 10 or 12-foot flag, they also have different requirements for meeting sustainability bonuses or for requiring permeable pavement. So none of those things are in this proposed ordinance, right? And so the staff, is just willing to kind of do more of a deep dive during the missing middle housing study. You guys at council have a great opportunity to decide whether or not you want to just go ahead and change some of these things now, whether it's through Barry's proposal, the citizen-led proposal, or if you want to look at staff's, alternative, what we think is what we can provide right now and live with that won't fly in the face of us not having anti-displacement measures in place. And then the third option, obviously, is for you all to reject adopting any kind of ordinance that night. So, but I didn't know how much, if you have more questions, we're here to, answer them.
Well, the one thing, and Barry, basically, he sort of touched on that this last slide, I think, when he talked about when people say something like ADU, so they can put an ADU. But in short, I know that they're opening up financing for ADU. But a lot of the people that I particularly deal with in my real estate, most of them, it doesn't matter if they have the land, they cannot get the financing to do it. So therefore, and like people say, a lot of times that particular being able to use a flat lot to access that back, that will sometimes save their home because the money can be utilized to save their home, or the money can be utilized to have a son, a daughter, rather to build a house there, as opposed to trying to find land elsewhere. Which, in the district, in Asheville, it's almost impossible to find any land lots. And if you do, 100, 125, 130,000 for a buildable lot, which means that automatically, but that can change. That can change the life. The financial aspect of a lot of the families. And the reason I say this, Stephanie, and I know this, is I do it all the time, and I have those spots. that people can actually convert right now to put money in their pockets to be able to save their homes in the city limits.
We absolutely appreciate that. It's a wonderful point. Thank you, Councilwoman.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you, Barry. Do we have any other? Oh, Barry, did you have your hand up? I'm sorry.
Sure. Yeah, I guess there's one just thing just to wrap up, just because I know we're at it's basically at a crossroads, and what do we do with this, right? And we have a missing middle study in front of us that as one of your largest missing middle developers, and as someone who's studied this many, many times, the missing middle study is not necessarily grounded in local reality, right? I think there's a lot of vetting that needs to happen to it, because it's a zoning report, but it's not based on infrastructure. It's not based on the realities of our topography, and it needs a lot of cooking out. So what you have in front of you is 2 amendments that are based in reality. And we go down to this, and like I asked, we have our own staff planner on staff now, and I asked him ahead of this meeting, like, how do I phrase this up? And he's like, look, this is the way to look at it. We've already gone ready, aim, fire. The question now is, do we go ready, aim, and then we don't know when we're going to fire. We have something in front of us that's going to make a change. And I think we've done some aiming. Nothing is perfect. We have time to vet this out. There's ways to improve this with a 1 year or 2 year, redo clause, but I think it's really important that we take some action. Thank you.
Okay. Maggie?
Yeah, I just want to follow up. So Barry, we had this conversation at council, and I hear you with the aim, fire. I share that frustration, having been a staff person, being a citizen, being on council, that can be a challenge. And I guess my question is, you heard what some of the main concerns were from city council, but I haven't seen any proposals or any revisions in your proposal to reflect adjustment towards that. I think that's the crossroads, is that we've already heard some feedback from our teammates, and we don't know how to resolve that feedback yet. So I'm curious if you have any, since the proposal hasn't been revised to address any of the displacement concerns, do you have any of those recommendations?
Well, so there's two, we did the studies when we did the dives into Durham and Raleigh to show that, like, some of these that this is while it's a big change, it's really a minor change that'll create new, it's a minor change that will create housing, but it's not going to have the gigantic displacement effect. And here there's 2 cities that went through the same concerns of this, and they've passed them, and they've now done their studies 2 years. Some of them have had 3 years of studies later to show that this hasn't had the effect people worried about. Yet there definitely have been discussions of we can design this that it excludes, the Shiloh neighborhood. But then, when I read the piece from Raleigh, where it says that the flag lots have been a way for how to keep people in their homes, I feel so strongly against that. I feel like, it's really fundamental. Yes. I feel like if I went to council and I said, okay, well, if we remove Shiloh, we remove South French Broad, maybe I can get support for this the same way. But it feels wrong because it removes a tool that people might need to keep their homes. The goal is, like, people want to remain. This could create a tool for how people can remain in their homes and sell off a piece of their house or create a generational piece of it for others. So removing an option seems wrong to me. The other way, and there's no question, yeah, we've thought through this, and that's why we did the really deep dive into Durham and Raleigh, because these have been in places and they've shown that the displacement hasn't been there. And that it's created less expensive housing, which is what we need. So yes, we continue to study the displacement, and we'll never know that until we do it. So here's the tool we can do. We can implement for a year and then say, hey, let's look at this after a year to say, how did this work? Or we can say, let's exclude Shiloh and some other neighborhoods. That feels wrong to me. Another tool and thought through is the majority of Shiloh is an RS zoning district, not RM. We could just apply this to RM. But again, it really feels wrong to me, where I think from all that I've been through and I think this is trying to create a tool that empowers the individual, empowers the small builder, empowers the property owner. This isn't a tool for developers. And I think I think that's important to, to keep in mind that we can study and study displacement, but until we do it, we won't really know. But looking at 2 other cities in North Carolina that had the same concerns and have adopted it, and now look back and said, you know what, we haven't had an increase in demo permits. That means there hasn't been the same displacement. Or in Raleigh, that it's been a tool to keep people in their houses. That's what we want. So yes, we've spent most of the time studying the displacement issues, and then certainly, we've read through the 150-page missing middle. Scott on staff was on the committee. Missing middle needs a lot of work. Missing middle, there's an example in the missing middle. There's an RM16 example in missing middle that doesn't have sewer access to it. So it shows that missing middle is what we did was a zoning study. And we really need to attach zoning to reality, where we have infrastructure, where we have sidewalks. And then, I do, again, it's a little out of topic, but yeah, I don't necessarily agree in Asheville that there's not a way with creating small single family homes that we could really help with this problem. Look at Beloved. Beloved wouldn't have been able to do what they did in their village by building an 8-plex or 16-plex. They were able to do it by empowering individuals, small builders, and creating 15 homes affordable with no city funding. And then I think, small changes like this can empower people who really want to help be part of the change to be part of that. And that's what I'm asking for.
I really appreciate you kind of threading that through from the presentation and speaking to it here. Appreciate it.
I just want to ask a question, Barry. Now, I think it was the staff recommended 3 homes, being the maximum. Okay.
Yeah.
2 boys, is it 3 being the maximum, or is it? Yeah. Barry could you sort of go back to that? Hold on a minute. Yeah. Okay. They were saying 2 homes to a lot. Is that what it is?
I was suggesting 2. Yeah. And the reason, so the cottage development is an ordinance that's been in place for 10 to 15 years. It's only been used 2 or 3 times. I actually drove through a citizen suggested wording amendment about 6 years ago to change it, but it's a flawed tool. The whole pointing towards the street. Chris and I have sat through meetings and even saying, this doesn't really work. You can't point things towards the street when something sets far back. So the reason for the 2 is that the 2 is anything over 2 houses requires a different driveway standard. Okay. It requires fire access. It requires a formal review site plan. So 2 units it remains in residential building codes. The access remains a driveway instead of a fire access. So anything over 2 units needs a fire access driveway. So that's why I'm on the 2.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Good point.
Yeah. And we already have so many mechanisms that allow 2 houses on a lot. You're allowed to do a house in the ADU. You're allowed to do a townhouse in an RSA. But if you turn it sideways, it's not allowed. So it's just kind of some of the funny nuances of zoning.
Badilla, have your hand up.
Thanks. Just to chime in, I want to clarify, this is a point that some of you have heard, but I think it's important nuance that the suggestion about changing the regulations for cottages is really not intended to benefit cottages. The idea is it's trying to be able to permit 2 homes within RS8, which is fine. We need to keep that in mind. If the goal, as Barry's suggesting, is 2 homes on a lot, it really should be couched for what it really is, that this should be a conversation about allowing 2 homes in RS8 or in single family districts in general. Because if we're actually interested in more homes, first of all, let's make this relevant to single family districts. Not just RS8. Also, because it's really not going to benefit the intent of cottages. So we don't want to confuse what the cottage development is. We should just focus on permitting 2 homes in RS8 or in RS in general. So I'll leave you with that. Thanks.
So where you're saying, Badilla, if it's already RS8, then it would be sort of RS 16? Are you saying that they could actually do that as far as.
I'm just suggesting if we're going to make a change in RS8, because cottages are allowed in RS8 today.
Yeah.
The only thing is Barry doesn't want to build 5 or 3. He wants to build 2. So if we just want to allow 2 homes in RS8,
A lot, yeah.
the change could be the minimum that RS8 or, a change in these areas allows for 2 homes. So it's a little bit a different way of thinking, but I think it's important because this really isn't about cottages.
Yeah, Sandra.
Okay.
So we'll say we're saying that the cottage cluster ordinance is being used as a method to allow for 2 homes to be placed on that, whereas maybe we should use a different method and allow us to keep the integrity of the intent of the cottage cluster, which is to create community orient homes, smaller homes towards an open space. So appreciate the creative problem solving that Barry is doing. And the other side of that is then why have a cottage cluster ordinance at all if it's not?
Look at this. This is the reason. Okay. Now, say for instance, if we can't do the whole lots, where, right? It's not on lots 50, it's 50 width. If we could allow 2 homes on that lot because it has the length on it, and you could actually put 2 homes on there. How does that work? Because that could actually solve a problem. To some
So I'll just state one more time, or to keep this going. Part of the missing middle study suggested that one consideration, instead of adjusting flag lot regulations, is to create a small lot ordinance.
Yeah.
So what this would do would be it would allow all lots, regardless of lot width, to have enough depth to take advantage of this.
There you go.
But this is a different. This would be a different standard with different regulations, and we'd have to look at it and look at the impacts and all that.
Okay, well, okay.
Yeah, I think there's no question the missing middle needs like the deeper dive to look at things like this, like how to create lots with it. There's so many things that could come from the missing middle by taking these deeper looks. But in the meantime, we have 2 tools that just aren't working, that will work better with minor tweaks. And that's really all this, that's really what the approach is. Yes, all of those other approaches would be phenomenal, but those need a lot more cooking out, like to create lots that, create lots without frontage or things like that. But in the meantime, if we have an ordinance that we have a simple ordinance, and ours is not, it was always really clear, ours is not called cottage cluster, ours is cottage development, which basically just defines it as a subdivision of smaller defined homes. So this basically, with allowing 2 houses or 5 houses or 15 houses, we already have the language in the UDO that limits the size. And that's why I was just like, well, if we already allow in RS8 for you to do 5, why not do 2? We already have all of the mechanisms built in. So this is just a simple slide, a simple tweak to make it more accessible. And that's really, it's like all of the language is already in there. So all we're having to change is the 5 to 2. And that's where that came from. It's like we already have this wording in place. And yes, there's plenty of long discussions and we know in our process, there's plenty of more things that can come out of missing middle, but these are 2 simple things that we could adopt now and have time to measure while we're still moving through with the effects of whatever new potential missing middle changes we come up with.
Any other questions? Thank you very much, Barry, and thank you, Chris. Robust conversation. I'm sure we will be continuing. Okay, thank you. The next thing on our agenda would be number 4 is personal micromobility devices, proposed policy updates. That will be presented by Jessica Barnes, who's the interim transportation director, and also Haley Burton, urban planner 2.
Good evening, Councilwomen. Tonight we are just going to give you a brief presentation about some proposed policy updates, recommendations that staff is bringing forward related to micromobility. And if you want to go to the next slide, Haley, I can do the takeaways. So the key takeaways from this presentation are that the primary reason that we're bringing this forward is because in October of last year, I can't believe that was last year, Council looked at the College Patent Complete Streets project and approved that project downtown. As part of that, there was a direction from Council to staff to prepare amendments that would be made to ordinances to permit all modes of personal transportation within bike lanes. And Haley will go over what that means when we say personal transportation. But we are looking at all of the existing ordinances that relate to transportation and the different devices that people use these days to get around. And we have to look just beyond just allowing these types of things in bike lanes because we don't have bike lanes on every street. So we also have to kind of zoom out a little bit and look at possible amendments to ordinances as it relates to roads without bike lanes and also sidewalks and greenways. So we're trying to take a holistic look at everything and come up with some recommendations to apply to all of these different things. And then after we get feedback from all of the different groups, we will start working with our city attorney's office to draft up some of these changes. And then we would bring forward actual red line changes to ordinances for you guys to take a look at. So we have 8 recommendations related to these that Haley is going to walk us through right now.
Thanks, Jessica. To start, we just wanted to give a definition of micromobility for anyone who's not familiar with that term. And the Federal Highway Administration broadly defines micromobility as any small, low-speed, human or electric-powered transportation device, including things you're already familiar with: bicycles, scooters, e-bikes, e-scooters, and other small, lightweight wheeled conveniences. Next slide, please. Like Jessica said, we have 8 initial policy recommendations. We can come back to this slide as a reference later, but really we're looking for feedback at this time to later bring these recommendations forward to adopt for language changes in our existing code. Next slide. So we lumped the first 3 recommendations together. In our current code, there's not a definition of micromobility devices. So our recommendation is to include language and include a definition of micromobility devices that includes electric and human powered devices. And in that definition, making sure that we're excluding wheelchairs from that definition. We also want to allow for the use of personal micromobility devices, while at the same time continuing to prohibit shared e-scooter and other micromobility device companies from operating in the city at this time. So basically, if someone had their own personal e-scooter, they could go out on the street and use it as a viable transportation option, but a company couldn't come in and drop, a bunch of scooters in the public right away at this time. Next slide. The 4th recommendation is to allow for the use of these devices in bike lanes and on low-speed local streets, which we're defining as streets that are 25 miles per hour or less. An exception to this that's important to note is that in state law, bicycles are allowed on all types of streets except for interstates, and we don't want to make any changes to that. So bicycles would still be allowed on streets higher than 25 miles per hour or less, as long as they're not interstates. Another important note is that in state law, wheelchair users are defined as pedestrians, and pedestrians are currently required to use a sidewalk when a sidewalk exists. Some things that we've heard from the community and from council is that there is a desire at times for wheelchair users to be able to use a bike lane, even if a sidewalk exists, because maybe the sidewalk is very crowded, or maybe the sidewalk isn't up to a condition that makes it easy to ride on. So our legal team thinks that we can add to our code to allow wheelchair users to ride in bike lanes if they desire. It doesn't mean they have to if there's a sidewalk, but it gives them an additional option. Next slide. The fifth recommendation is to allow for micromobility devices on greenways and trails. We recommend this to be both human-powered and electric devices, and on both paved and natural surface trails. We're not recommending a speed limit on greenways and trails at this time, but we could take the approach, and likely would want to take the approach, of signage and messaging on greenways and trails to let people know what appropriate user behavior is. Next slide. So these next two recommendations usually have brought the most feedback and the most discussion around. So we have a couple slides relating to these two recommendations. The first is to prohibit the use of micromobility devices on sidewalks within the central business district, and essentially to allow for these devices on sidewalks outside of the CBD. The reasoning for this recommendation is due to the high volume of pedestrian traffic and many different types of users within the CBD that could create conflicts on the sidewalk. And also within the CBD, most streets are fit within that definition of 25 miles per hour or less, low speeds. And as you know, we are building out additional bicycle facilities in the downtown area. Outside of the CBD, some users of these devices may not feel safe with higher speeds and additional traffic. And since there's likely minimal pedestrian traffic in many of these areas, we would like to allow for people to ride on the sidewalk when it makes sense outside of the CBD. That being said, too, we would also, these users would always still be required to yield to pedestrians and other users on the sidewalk. Next slide, please. An alternative approach or companionship approach to a full sidewalk ban in the CBD is this concept of dismount zones, where people may get off of their devices and walk on the sidewalk, but not ride. These images just give some different examples of what that might actually look like in application. Next slide. So this table we hope is useful for those who think about things visually. This is just a summary of those recommendations for local streets, bike lanes, and sidewalks, both in the CBD and outside of the CBD. So the last two rows are representative of the changes that we're proposing. So again, in summary, allowing micromobility on streets less than 25 miles per hour. They're currently prohibited. Allowing them in bike lanes and allowing them on sidewalks outside of the CBD. And additionally, we would like to allow wheelchairs to ride in bike lanes even when a sidewalk is present, if desired. Next slide. This is the last recommendation, and it's to update and ensure consistency among regulations related to enforcement and removal of micromobility devices. So in current code, if a bicycle, just like a vehicle, is left unattended on public property for a certain amount of time, those devices can be removed. And we just want to make sure that any addition of micromobility to our code is consistent with what's already in code. And we also want to make sure that we can still allow for removal of these devices from unpermitted shared micromobility operators or companies. Next slide. So we've gotten a lot of great feedback as we've been talking to folks about these recommendations. We've met so far with the Active Transportation Committee, the Multimodal Transportation, and the Downtown Commission. This isn't everything that we've heard, but this is some of the main themes. In general, there's support for these policies and the approach that's been taken. Some members have preferred a sidewalk ban in the CBD and other potentially other business districts, while others thought that a sidewalk riding ban in the CBD is just perpetuating a barrier that currently exists today to use these devices, and have made comments that something that's not easily enforceable, like a sidewalk ban, could leave potential room for discriminatory enforcement. We also heard a push to just make sure that these devices can go hand in hand with using transit in the city. We want to allow for these devices on buses, provide training to operators for when people are trying to bring them on board, and ensure that there's additional parking for these devices at the transit station. We also heard from our Downtown Commission members that a preference to expand the sidewalk ban. Well, sorry, let me reword that. They want to expand. They have a preference for the dismount zones as opposed to a full sidewalk ban, and they would like to expand that outside of the central business district to all business districts within the city, including Biltmore Village and Haywood Road. And in general, from, I would say, every group we've heard, there's just been a push for education and rider etiquette campaigns just to make sure people know that any policy changes we make, what they are and how it affects their use of these devices moving forward. Next slide. This is just a recap of who we've talked to so far. We're here talking to this committee today, and going forward, we want to go to the Riverfront Commission to get additional feedback and potentially revisit some of the committees or commissions that had additional questions. And then moving forward, we would draft ordinance change language, and in April, bring those to City Council for adoption. Next slide. In summary, we're bringing these forward now at this time in response to the resolution passed during the College Patton Complete Streets project to permit the use of all modes of personal transportation within bike lanes, and looking at other transportation facilities. Staff sees these devices as viable transportation options, and we're really just trying to remove barriers with these recommendations and still set us up to have regulations in place for when needed. So thanks for listening, and would love to hear any questions or any comments and feedback.
Thank you, Haley. Greatly appreciate it. And I just wanted to sort of, Jessica, I think we had discussed, I think there were some concerns about the bicycle. If you go back to the list there where you show who have access to, I think it's, yeah, there you go. And I noticed that basically the current code is for bicycles all the way across, which are also on sidewalks. And I know that basically, if we're putting in bike lanes, my concern was, if there's bike lanes present, I feel that bicycles should refrain from sidewalk. I know that you said a lot of, you had some concern about that. And I know this is a feedback and recommendations. I was just wondering what type of recommendations have you been getting or feedback on that aspect of it?
We haven't, and Haley, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know that we've gotten feedback specifically about that question, but it's something that we need to have further discussions with, I think, the Multimodal Transportation Commission. But so what I'm hearing is that our proposal is to prohibit the use of micromobility devices on sidewalks. However, our current proposal is to not apply that to bicycles because state law allows, or state law is sort of silent about bicycles using sidewalks. And so I think what I'm hearing you say, Sandra, is that perhaps we should be considering also prohibiting bicycles from using sidewalks in the CBD or the downtown district. And so that would be, that's definitely, there's definitely logic to that for sure. And so I think it's something that we need to ask for additional feedback from folks, that we probably didn't make that distinction clear enough, perhaps in some of our initial meetings. So I hear what you're saying.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, I was surprised to see that our policy allows them bicycles on those sidewalks, and I agree. It's just too many users in one space and too many speeds in one space. It just creates a lot of safety risk and concern.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's it's weighing. What we're trying to do is decrease barriers. So prohibiting something that's not currently prohibited would be introducing a barrier, one could argue. We're reducing, if we have a prohibition, then that could be argued as a barrier that doesn't exist now for bicycles, because bicycles are covered under state law, and state law doesn't say anything about bicycles using sidewalks as far as I can find. So there's like, do you want to be everything to be consistent and a prohibition be consistent among all of the different types of transportation devices, or do you want to continue to not prohibit bikes? It can get kind of confusing, and so maybe in light of that, maybe the consistency makes more sense.
Yeah. I also feel like we can hold multiple goals at the same time, right? And so to me, like, I would never want to put safety on the sidelines in favor of access, right? And so if we're holding those at the same time, then I think, then I think that places where there is high risk of conflicts between users is a place that we want to be really cautious and careful. And and then I was downtown Saturday morning, and then I went out again Saturday night, and like, it's bustling. There's lots of folks, there's lots of energy. And I, as everybody knows, I'm a bike rider. I don't think that's that safe, or a scooter, because then you're having a really different level of control of the vehicle. So I like the idea of that consistency as well.
Yeah. I was riding downtown this afternoon, and I did happen to see someone actually riding a bike on a sidewalk, but it was there was not a busy time. It was not a busy location. So I think Haley mentioned, we'd also heard, not from the complete, this was not consensus by any means, from the downtown commission, but there was at least one person on downtown commission that was interested in not having a prohibition in code, in law, but just using education and signage and like the dismount zone, having dismount zone on the sidewalk and signage as a tool, as an education rather than a legal thing. So, I mean, I think what we've heard is that the dismount zones and the education should come no matter what. But he was saying maybe we should consider just staying silent on the use of these devices on sidewalks instead of making it punitive. But I think the majority of downtown commission wanted there to be a code prohibition on micromobility devices on sidewalks downtown. And so that's what we've heard. I think more support for that versus not having anything.
Thank you.
Does that make sense?
Okay. Any other questions? Ben?
Thank you. I just want to take a second to recognize Haley. I think, Haley, this is your first presentation to a council committee, and you did a great job with a lot of dense and at times complex subject material. So I just want to tell Haley, thank you and nice job.
Thank you.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Okay. So thank you very much, Haley and Jessica. And we'll move on to our last item on the agenda will be the Patton Avenue downtown section design speed limit. The resource will be Ben Woody, doing the presentation.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to kind of kick us off and then turn it over to the committee for a brief discussion. So again, good afternoon and thanks for your patience to getting to this last item. We added this item to the PED agenda to allow the committee to briefly discuss the I-26 connector project's proposed design from 4 Patton Avenue. So this is the section of Patton Avenue from the Bowen Bridge into downtown. And this is the section that will be affected by the improvements that are forthcoming in the future related to the I-26 connector project. Currently, as proposed for the design build process right now, the design speed for this section of Patton is 35 miles per hour, which can have some implications in terms of urban design and the layout of the cross sections of the road. Just a little bit of background on this. City Council appointed several years ago an I-26 Aesthetics Committee. That committee has met regularly and they approved a resolution on June 21st, 2022, requesting a 25 mile per hour design speed for this section of roadway. Again, this is from Patton, from the Bowen Bridge, really to Klingman and into the downtown area. On June 22nd, 2022, the Multimodal Transportation Commission approved a motion supporting the I-26 Aesthetics Committee's resolution for a lower design speed limit. And then one last piece of information to aid in your discussion today is the city recently kicked off our Patton Avenue corridor study, and you've had an update on that project from Videla Satmaka at a previous meeting. And as you know, that corridor study will create a vision to implement a mixed-use corridor and formalize the transportation, land use, and urban design recommendations for what will become the western gateway for downtown Asheville. So that's kind of the reimagined Patton Avenue of the future. So with that background information and at the request of the committee, I'm going to turn it over and allow a little space for any discussion that you may have about the status of this project. And of course, I've got Stephanie Dahl here to help me answer any questions that I am not able to answer.
I could jump in. I think that, from my understanding with street designs, the speed limit really triggers a bunch of decisions for how people experience that street, how close trees are there to the sidewalk, how much space away from the road there needs to be. You ever walk on a sidewalk and out in front of my house, the sidewalk's 18 inches. But if it were a 45-mile-an-hour road, it might need to be much wider than that. So given how critical Patton Avenue is into, again, the gateway to our town, I'm eager to consider or like encourage or ask DOT to reduce the design speed limit from 35 to 25. I think the one thing that gives me pause or that I'm investigating further in the process of this conversation is our relationship with DOT is so dynamic and so important, and this project is so massive that I haven't been able to sit down and talk directly with them, although I have a lunch on the calendar, I think next week to do that, and also have time through MPO conversations. So I think that how we manage our relationship with DOT through I-26 is really important. This is a long play, and we need to be accountable to the community and good partners through all of it. But barring this isn't some disastrous conversation with DOT, I think it could be a really huge improvement if we ask DOT to reduce their design standard from 35 to 25. So I'd be really curious to see, Sandra, what you think. I know Sage isn't on the call today too, but I'd love to see what the other councilwomen think, and maybe we could make a recommendation for council to entertain a resolution that we could ask DOT to reduce the design speed.
I'm not opposed to, asking or whatever, because like you said, if it could be safer, a better experience for people, then I'm all on board for that. But if I think, Ben, if you could give me an idea of one of the suggestions, I think we had talked about this earlier, was sort of doing it at a later date. What exactly? Could you explain that?
Yeah, thank you for that question. There's been a lot of discussion about the design speed limit and just kind of the impact that this new Patton Avenue corridor will have on the entrance to downtown. There's some correspondence, and I think what DOT has indicated at times in the past is that if the initial design speed were 35 miles per hour, they would say that as the property in the future, or the corridor, I should say, in the future began to redevelop, they would consider reevaluating the design speed. So I think to this point, DOT's position has been that let's start with 35, and then as the corridor urbanizes, because remember, a lot of this land right now is just what will become old right of way, so there's nothing there now. As it urbanizes, they would reconsider the design speed limit. I think the aesthetics committee would say, well, no, we should actually go ahead and consider that now, because we think the design implications should be considered in the beginning of the process. So I hope that answers your question, Chairwoman Kilgore. It's just a matter of timing, where I think DOT has typically said, let's do that later in the process. And I think our advisory boards and aesthetics committee are saying, no, let's do that earlier in the process.
Okay. Thanks. And so therefore, if we do make that request and it's still not, amenable to DOT, it is something that we can visit later if necessary.
Yeah, I mean, I think like Councilman Alvin said, the relationship with DOT is incredibly important to this organization, and we'll continue to work with them. And if we have to do that in the future, that's what we'll do. But we'll obviously, if council would like to, we'll do that in the interim as well. So exactly, I think it's just trying to continue to advocate and plan for the best design possible for that part of Patton Avenue.
Okay, great. Sounds good.
Yep.
So any other comments? Or
do we need to make a formal vote on sending a resolution to council?
I guess it should. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say real quickly, I think if this is something you would like the full council to consider, yes, we would need some sort of direction today, I think, to schedule that for a future council meeting and have consideration of a resolution recommending a different design speed for Patton Avenue corridor.
Okay. Okay. Great. So you have we don't have to vote on that or anything. We'll just sort of, right? Ben? we won't need to vote on that to move it forward or whatever? Or just-
I'll let Janice correct me if I'm really wrong. I think you would want to have some sort of action to have council consider a resolution. I think that the PED would need to initiate some sort of vote. And I don't know, Janice, you can correct me if I'm wrong.
If you're going to do a motion to recommend, then you're going to vote on it, right?
Okay, great.
And that's just, even if there's just the two of you, but just to move it forward.
Okay, Maggie, would you like to make a motion?
Sure. I make a motion that City Council consider advocating to, asking DOT to reduce the design speed into Patton Avenue from 35 miles an hour to 25 miles an hour. I know that there's a bit more technical to it of where would that start, where would it stop, but I would trust staff could kind of sort through some of that, and I'd be happy to look at a resolution ahead of council or what have you. The other thing I'd insert is that part of the timing, which you were getting to, Sandra, is, do we advocate, do we push for this now or later? And they'll be selecting their design contractor in February. And so I think part of having this in there now sets that contractor up from day one with this expectation. And so if possible to squeeze into a council agenda in January, that would be really ideal.
Great, so I will second that motion. Yeah. I mean, it sort of went on and on. I sort of, but anyway, so, okay, so I'll take a vote. Alderman, Councilman Alderman?
Aye.
Okay, and myself, aye. So we'll move on, passes and move on to council. Thank you. Okay, at this time, do we have anyone in the queue, Katie?
One moment and I will check. Yes, we do. We do have a couple. Just one moment. Caller ending in 4815. Your line is now open.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
One moment. Hello, this is Susan Loftus, and I appreciate greatly being able to speak to you briefly. I know it's been a long meeting, and I wanted to thank, first of all, Ben and...
Caller ending in 4815. Your line is now open.
Hello, this is Susan Loftus.
Can you hear me?
Okay, hello, this is Susan Loftus, and I appreciate greatly being able to speak to you briefly. I know it's a long meeting. And I wanted to thank, first of all, Ben and...
Caller ending in 4815. Your line is now open.
Hello, this is Susan Loftus.
Hey, Susan, can you hold for a minute? Susan, we can, if you turn off your background noise, we can hear you just fine. There's something going wrong on our end with the technology, but we can right now if you just want to mute that and talk to us.
Okay, thank you so much. I know it's been a long meeting. I appreciate greatly the effort that's already gone into trying to familiarize yourself. Hello?
Keep going.
Can you hear? Can y'all hear me? Because I see Steph talking. So, okay, thank you. Particularly Ben, Julie Mayfield, Maggie, so many of you and the mayor have put in some time to try to get familiar with this I-26 project. And it took me a year when I moved to Asheville, even to get remotely familiar with it. So I thank you for your time and effort, and I appreciate you trusting my advice here. And the basis for it is that we do have good relationships with NCDOT, and we do have agreement from Division 13 that in the future, yes, they'll reconsider the design speed. But the problem with that is that it would require in the future rebuilding a road that we're already spending $1.5 billion to implement a 26 plan, that the emphasis from the city has always been to get the highway off Bowen Bridge and to return Bowen and Patton Avenue to its original use, which is an urban street. And the current design does not allow for that. It does not allow for the tight radii, for the minimal crossing width, for the setbacks, like Maggie mentioned. The current requirements would be 20-foot setback for any kind of structure, whereas the visioning that we've been doing for 30 years would have more like a 10-foot setback in certain sections. So that's why at the very last minute and in a pretty, last minute request to you all, this design speed reduction resolution would make it clear to NCDOT what our vision actually is. And that would also then tie in to the McAdams study that Brad and the other staff members are working on now to come up with the visioning for that area. The speed limit reduction would support their effort. And in my opinion, it's important, as Maggie said, to go ahead and get that resolution passed before the design build contractor is on board. So thank you so much for your consideration. And I hope that it can be on the City Council agenda before the end of January. Thank you.
Do you have another caller?
Yes, we do. One moment. Caller ending in 0888. Your line is now open.
Hey, good afternoon, committee members. This is Jack Eigelman, and I serve as the Multimodal Transportation Commission Chair. And I wanted to chime in as well on the Patton Avenue speed limit. And I also want to support, trying to get a resolution at a January council meeting to sort of push this ahead. Lowering speed limits is often a common topic of conversation on our commission. I think there's a growing body of research that shows that speed limits can, lead to measurable declines in crashes, and ultimately save lives. It will create a safer downtown space. And I think it'll make it safer for pedestrians, cyclists, disabled, children, elderly, motorists. I think it'll also create a safer and potentially quieter and more welcoming environment downtown. And I realize that, having a strong relationship with DOT is important. And I understand the, issue of thinking about this and when we do the work, but we also think that we should really think about that space on the Bowen Bridge and east of it into downtown as really focusing on lower speed limits. So thanks for listening to my comments. I also wanted to just make a quick comment on Haley's presentation. I did have a chance to hear it earlier at our December meeting. And just the conversation about cyclists using sidewalks, I just want to point out I think it'll really be a non-issue of cyclists using sidewalks downtown if cyclists feel safe on the streets. And so I'm excited about the upcoming project to repaint Patton and College, because I think that will make it safer for cyclists, and I think they'll choose to be on the road rather than sidewalks. So I just wanted to throw that comment in. So thank you all for taking a moment to listen and discuss and being enthusiastic about thinking about lower speed limits east of the bridge. Thanks.
Thanks, Jack. Okay. So do we have anyone else in the queue?
I'm going to reload and check. No, we do not. That's all.
Okay. So at this time, do we have any more comments of council or staff? Okay, thank you very much. And at this time, thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye. Bye-bye.